The courtroom buzzed with an undercurrent of tension, a quiet hum that seemed to vibrate through every wooden bench, every polished surface, every pane of glass reflecting the anxious faces. Sunlight streamed in through tall windows, illuminating motes of dust that floated like tiny specters above the heads of townspeople gathered in silent anticipation. Today was not just any day in this sleepy mid-sized American town. It was the day a story that had gripped the community for months would reach its climax. Outside, the streets were busy with reporters, camera crews, and curious onlookers craning for a glimpse of the courthouse steps. Every passing car, every echoing footstep seemed to heighten the collective pulse of those who had been waiting so long for justice. Inside, the air smelled faintly of old wood and polished floors, mingling with the nervous perfume and cologne of the assembled crowd. A small group of children shuffled near the back, fidgeting in the midst of whispered admonishments from their parents, their eyes wide and alert. Among them was a little girl, barely 3, clinging to her mother's hand with tiny fingers that trembled ever so slightly. She had hair the color of honey and eyes so large, so impossibly observant, that it was almost unsettling. She scanned the room in silence, taking in every detail. The stern judge perched on his bench like a watchful sentinel, the attorneys packing like predators sizing up a room, the murmuring spectators, and the quiet but powerful presence of a German shepherd that sat near the front of the courtroom, muscles taut, ears perked. Rex the K9 was no ordinary dog. His sleek coat gleamed under the courtroom lights, and his amber eyes flickered with an intelligence and awareness that seemed almost human. Beside him, Officer Daniels maintained a careful hand on his harness, a subtle anchor for both the dog and the chaotic energy of the trial. Rex had been trained for years to detect scents, track evidence, and sense the faintest tremors of fear, guilt, or hesitation in a room. Today, however, he seemed unusually attuned to one tiny human being, an instinctive connection that even the officer noted with a quiet nod. The judge rapped the gavel sharply against the bench, cutting through the murmurs like a blade. "Order in the court," he commanded, his voice firm but weary. His eyes swept over the packed room, lingering for a moment on the parents and their daughter. "We will now proceed with the testimony in the case of the State versus Harold Jennings." A ripple of whispers spread through the courtroom. Harold Jennings, a man whose alleged crime had rocked the town to its core, sat stiffly at the defendant's table, hands clasped, jaw tight, eyes darting nervously. His attorney gave him a reassuring squeeze on the shoulder, but it did little to mask the tension radiating off him in waves. For months, the case had dominated local news. It wasn't just the crime itself. It was the confusion, the dead ends, the sense that justice might slip through everyone's fingers. The details were frustratingly elusive. A robbery gone wrong, a trail of evidence that seemed to vanish before investigators could grasp it, conflicting witness statements, and a town desperate for answers. People had gathered outside the courthouse steps for weeks, watching every update, whispering theories, debating who could be guilty. And now, in this moment, all eyes were on the courtroom, waiting for the slow, deliberate unfolding of a truth that had remained just out of reach. The little girl tugged at her mother's sleeve, her gaze flicking nervously toward Rex. The dog's head followed her movements, ears twitching at the faintest signals, a silent communication that passed unnoticed by nearly everyone else. The girl's parents exchanged a glance, a mixture of worry and hope, unsure of how much she understood, uncertain whether her observations, so fragmented, so childlike, would ever play a role in the complex web of legal arguments and forensic evidence. Yet the bond between child and dog seemed undeniable, almost magnetic, drawing the attention of anyone who looked closely enough. As the first witness was called, the atmosphere shifted. Reporters leaned forward, pens scratching, cameras swiveling, capturing the expressions of the gallery. The witness, a store clerk, shuffled to the stand, adjusting her glasses, visibly nervous. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the edges of the podium. She began recounting the night of the incident, her voice quivering, painting a picture of chaos. The sudden entry of a masked intruder, the shouts, the stolen items, and the fleeting moments that had left her shaken. Every word was met with rapt attention, but even as she spoke, the parents, little girl, seemed to process her own memories in the corner of the room, her lips moving silently as though rehearsing something she couldn't yet fully articulate. Lawyers whispered among themselves, exchanging notes, their eyes occasionally flicking to the child and Rex. Even seasoned officers felt the subtle tension in the air, the sense that this trial was not following a normal path. Evidence was thin, testimonies were shaky, and the threads connecting suspect, crime, and consequence were fragile, easily disrupted by a single overlooked detail. No one could anticipate the significance of what was about to occur, how the innocence of a toddler, paired with the keen instincts of a K-9, could unravel the uncertainty that had plagued the case for months. Minutes passed like hours as the courtroom absorbed the testimony. The girl remained quiet, a tiny observer in a sea of adults, her wide eyes reflecting a mixture of fear, curiosity, and something deeper, a premonition perhaps, or an instinctual understanding that she alone held a piece of the puzzle. Rex's gaze never left her, a constant and unwavering presence, alert to the slightest shift in her body language. For the officers, the attorneys, the judge, and the spectators, this was an ordinary courtroom proceeding. But beneath the surface, tension coiled tightly like a spring, waiting for the first hint of revelation. Then came the subtle movements. A glance from the girl toward Rex, barely perceptible but deliberate. The dog responded immediately, shifting, ears flicking, a low rumble in his throat, not threatening, not aggressive, but alert. The courtroom seemed to pause without realizing it. Conversations faded, pens hovered mid-scribble, breaths caught collectively. Something was about to happen, though no one yet understood what. The child's tiny hand twitched, pointing imperceptibly, almost reflexively, and the air thickened with expectation. The mundane order of a courtroom, rules, procedure, evidence, stood on the precipice of being disrupted in the most extraordinary of ways. The judge, oblivious to the silent communication between child and dog, called for a short recess. Lawyers muttered, officers stretched, and the gallery murmured in anticipation. Outside, the community held its breath. This was no ordinary trial. Something remarkable, something no one could have predicted, was stirring in the quiet, almost unnoticed corner where a toddler and a police dog shared a connection beyond words. It was the calm before the storm, the fragile stillness before events would explode into a sequence that would leave the town, and the courtroom, stunned. And in that calm, the tiny girl's mind replayed the fragments of that fateful night. The shadowy figure, the clatter of stolen goods, the fleeting image that no adult had noticed. She had seen it all in her own small way, and though she lacked the words to explain, she carried the truth within her. Rex, attuned to her, sensed the importance of her silent recollections, the urgency, the clarity beneath her innocent exterior. Together, they were about to challenge the assumptions of the entire courtroom. As the gavel struck again, signaling the end of the recess, a subtle anticipation thrummed in the air, invisible yet undeniable. Adults straightened, eyes sharpening, minds alert. But no one, no prosecutor, no defense attorney, no juror, no officer, no reporter, could have predicted the extraordinary revelation that was about to unfold, all from the tiniest witness in the room. A story that had already captivated a town was poised to reach heights no one had imagined, and all it would take were 2 words and the unspoken bond between a child and a K-9 2 months before the courtroom drama. The town had been ripped from its quiet rhythm. At the edge of Main Street, nestled between a diner and a hardware store, a small neighborhood shop had been broken into in the dead of night. The alarm had blared briefly, but by the time the responding officers arrived, the culprit had vanished, leaving behind an eerie emptiness and a swirl of questions that refused to settle. Valuable items, electronics, cash, and rare collectibles had disappeared without a trace. For a town of modest means, it was more than theft. It was a violation of trust, a shadow cast over the community. The store clerk, still shaken weeks later, recounted the events with tremors in her voice. Surveillance footage was grainy, showing only fleeting glimpses of a masked figure, tall, swift, moving with unnerving precision. Witnesses gave conflicting accounts. One neighbor claimed to have seen a suspicious van. Another insisted the suspect fled on foot. Fingerprints yielded nothing. The robber had been meticulous, leaving behind almost nothing to identify him. Detectives worked tirelessly, following leads that evaporated into frustration. The town's whispers grew louder. Who could commit such a crime and vanish so completely? Local authorities called in Rex, the K9, trained in tracking scents and uncovering hidden clues. The dog's instincts were unparalleled, capable of detecting faint traces of a person or object long after humans had lost the trail. Officers led Rex through the alleyways, the empty streets, and the surrounding woods, but even the seasoned canine struggled. The suspect seemed to have covered every angle, leaving nothing for even the sharpest nose to follow. Yet Rex's ears twitched at the faintest hints: a disturbed patch of grass, a tiny scuff on the pavement, and officers held their breath, knowing that each movement might be a breakthrough. Meanwhile, the little girl, unaware of the full complexity of the crime, had seen a small piece of it. From her vantage point, she had glimpsed a shadow moving past her house, a fleeting reflection in a window, the glint of an object clutched in a hand. She had tried to tell her parents, but words failed her. At 3, she could only gesture and babble in fragments. Her tiny recollections seemed meaningless to adults, but to her they were vivid, unforgettable. She remembered shapes, colors, and sounds that no one else had noticed. And though she couldn't articulate the connections, her mind had recorded them in perfect detail. The town's frustration was palpable. At the local diner, conversations swirled around the unsolved case. Neighbors speculated, some blaming outsiders, others whispering that the culprit must be someone known to the victims. Anxiety hung in the air like a fog. The media descended, cameras and microphones probing for statements, their flashes illuminating the worried faces of residents who had never imagined their town could feel so vulnerable. Law enforcement felt the weight of expectation, their frustration mounting as each lead came to nothing. Rex, however, had moments of brilliance. He would pause at certain spots, sniff intently, then look toward the officers as if to communicate what he sensed. Officers documented these subtle signals, hoping they might lead to something tangible. But even Rex's instincts, sharp as they were challenged by the careful planning of the intruder. The trail seemed to vanish at crucial moments, leaving the investigation in a frustrating loop of false hope and disappointment. The little girl's observations, though fragmented, held the key that no one recognized. She remembered the way the masked figure had hesitated for a brief moment by the back window, the direction of a certain step, the muffled sound of something metallic dropping. These tiny, inconspicuous details were enough to guide a trained eye or nose to the truth. Alone, the girl could not articulate them in a way that would make sense. But with Rex, her silent partner in perception, a bridge existed between memory and action, intuition and evidence. Law enforcement tried to reconstruct the scene meticulously. They analyzed security footage frame by frame, examined the points of entry and exit, and questioned every possible witness. Neighbors recalled sounds in the night, a faint shuffle, the distant hiss of brakes, but no one could piece it together coherently. Meanwhile, the girl continued to replay the scene in her head, moving tiny hands, pointing at corners, glancing repeatedly at Rex, unaware that the dog understood her cues. To adults, it seemed like childish behavior, yet Rex responded as if following an unspoken command, his body tensing at certain gestures, relaxing at others. The sense of helplessness was mutual. Detectives felt the frustration of a trail gone cold. The town felt the unease of unresolved violation. Even the store owner, normally cheerful and composed, admitted that the sense of security in the neighborhood had been shattered. Every customer's glance, every quiet footstep in the aisles, reminded them of what had been taken, and of the uncertainty that lingered. For the investigators, the pressure was immense. They needed a breakthrough, some thread to follow, something concrete that could lead to the identification of the culprit. One evening, as officers reviewed the evidence for the 100th time, Rex paused and sniffed along the perimeter of the store. His body stiffened. Officer Daniels, familiar with the dog's subtle cues, signaled the team to follow. They moved cautiously, eyes scanning the darkened streets. Rex led them to a barely noticeable trail, one that had gone unnoticed by human eyes. Leaves were slightly disturbed, a faint metallic scent lingered, and the dog's alertness increased. Though it was a small hint, it reignited hope, a spark in the dark that the case could finally move forward. The little girl, meanwhile, experienced vivid recollections that no one yet understood. She described fragments to her mother, pointing at directions, repeating shapes and colors. Her words were incoherent, but her gestures were precise, deliberate. Each motion seemed to mirror a piece of the puzzle. Rex watched her, responding to subtle cues invisible to the human eye. The connection between child and dog deepened, creating a silent communication that bridged the gap between memory and action. In the coming days, this connection would become pivotal, the fulcrum upon which the case's resolution would balance. At night, the town slept uneasily. Windows were locked, doors bolted, and lights left on in homes that had always been safe. Conversations lingered at kitchen tables about the crime and the seeming impossibility of resolution. The media continued to speculate. The local police department worked tirelessly, and Rex remained a vigilant partner in the effort. Yet the breakthrough remained elusive, waiting for a trigger that no one expected. A tiny, innocent mind, and the instincts of a loyal K-9 working together. The stage was set for the courtroom drama that would follow. The stolen items, the masked figure, the scattered clues, all of it had led to this point. The little girl, the silent witness who had seen more than anyone realized, and Rex, the K-9 whose instincts bridged the gap between observation and action, were poised to reveal the truth. And though no one could predict it, the events that began that night would culminate in a moment so extraordinary, so unexpected that the town, and indeed the entire courtroom, would be left stunned. The girl's mind was a kaleidoscope of fragmented memories. At 3 years old, her world was small and bright, full of simple routines, toys, and the gentle warmth of her parents' love. Yet, hidden beneath the innocence of her daily life, she carried snapshots of a night that had shaken the town. Details that adults overlooked, shapes, movements, and the tiniest glimmers of light, were etched into her memory with startling clarity. Though she could not articulate these recollections in full sentences, her gestures, glances, and fleeting expressions hinted at a remarkable understanding. Her parents noticed her quiet intensity but dismissed it as ordinary childlike curiosity. She pointed, tilted her head, and occasionally muttered sounds they could not decipher. To them, it was adorable, perhaps a little unusual, but not alarming. Yet to Rex, the K-9 trained to detect subtle behavioral cues, it was far from ordinary. The dog responded to every slight twitch, every glance toward a direction or object, as if understanding something invisible. In the silent language between child and dog, comprehension and intention passed effortlessly, a partnership that defied words. That night the girl had seen the masked intruder step carefully across the back of the store, pause briefly, and glance toward the alley before moving on. She had seen the reflection of a metal object, a glimmer that caught her eye for a fraction of a second. She remembered a sound, barely perceptible, a faint metallic clink, almost drowned out by the hum of the refrigerator in the store. Adults had dismissed these details as insignificant, but her mind had stored them precisely, as if anticipating their importance. In the days following the crime, she replayed these memories silently, her fingers moving in ways her parents barely noticed. At first, her gestures were random, a pointing finger here, a small pat on the floor there, but slowly patterns emerged. She mimicked movements she had seen, recreated steps of the intruder, and indicated places in her home and the yard that held echoes of the night. Each time Rex was nearby, he reacted, alert and attentive, tail stiff, ears pricked. To anyone watching, It might seem coincidental, but those who understood K9 behavior recognized the dog's responsiveness as significant. Her parents tried to encourage her to talk about what she had seen. They asked questions gently, hoping she could describe the intruder, the stolen objects, anything that might help the police. She tried, struggling with words that eluded her. She pointed at the air, muttered sounds, and made motions that seemed meaningless. Yet Rex's attention never wavered. He followed her gestures as if decoding a secret language. The bond was uncanny, a silent synchronization between perception and instinct. This relationship would soon prove critical in bridging the gap between a toddler's memory and the formal evidence needed to solve the case. At home, the girl reconstructed the events of that night in meticulous detail. She mimicked the intruder's steps across the room, the pause at the back window, the glint of a small metallic item. Her parents watched in amazement at her precision, unaware that these seemingly innocent reenactments contained actionable clues. She moved objects in her play area to represent positions and distances, her young mind translating the real-world crime into her own language of motion and gesture. Every repetition strengthened her memory and her ability to communicate the details non-verbally. Meanwhile, in the police department, investigators continued to hit dead ends. Fingerprints and DNA provided no leads. Witnesses, testimonies contradicted each other. Surveillance footage was grainy, offering glimpses of shapes rather than faces. The town's frustration mounted, deadlines loomed, and pressure mounted on the detectives. Officers like Daniels had begun to feel that the case might collapse under its own complexity. Yet Rex's subtle reactions offered glimmers of hope, small indications that somewhere, a trail might still exist. Something had to break the stalemate. Back in the courtroom, months later, the tension was mirrored in the girl's silent observations. She had been brought along by her parents, a practical necessity, yet she became a focal point in ways no adult anticipated. As lawyers debated, as witnesses recounted their stories, she would fidget, glance at Rex, or adjust her seating, her tiny body conveying more than words could. Observers, engrossed in the drama of testimony, largely ignored her, assuming she was just a restless child. But Rex reacted to every nuance, alert to her cues. In this interplay, the courtroom unknowingly contained the seeds of revelation. Her ability to recall and indicate key details was astonishing. She remembered not just movements but sequences, the way the intruder had paused, the direction of escape, subtle indicators of intent. These fragments, pieced together, could lead investigators to the missing evidence. Yet the challenge remained translating her gestures into information that adults, bound by logic and law, could understand. Here, Rex became an essential intermediary. His trained instincts allowed him to respond to subtle visual or tactile cues from the child, effectively transforming her silent observations into actionable leads. During court proceedings, moments of stillness revealed the depth of her awareness. She watched witnesses closely, noting inconsistencies in tone, in hesitation, in gestures. She pointed toward areas where she believed something significant had occurred, occasionally tilting her head as though trying to reconcile multiple perspectives. Rex remained at her side, following her focus, signaling to the officers when something captured her attention. The partnership between Toddler and K9 created a dynamic unseen by the average observer, an undercurrent of understanding threading silently through the courtroom's tense atmosphere. At home, the girl's play mirrored the crime with striking accuracy. She arranged toys to represent positions, demonstrated movements, and indicated objects that represented stolen items. Her parents were amazed at the specificity, yet struggled to translate her actions into coherent evidence. It was subtle, nuanced, and required someone with trained perception to interpret. Rex, in contrast, responded immediately. When she mimicked the dropping of a metal object, the dog's nose twitched. When she traced an escape route, his body stiffened, ears alert. This silent communication, intuitive and precise, would soon become the linchpin for the breakthrough everyone had been waiting for. Neighbors noticed the little girl's fascination with Rex during walks. She would point, gesture, and make sounds that seemed like nonsensical babble, yet the dog's behavior shifted in response. Officers began to observe these interactions more closely, realizing that the child's fragmented memory, when interpreted through Rex's instincts, could reveal critical leads. The idea seemed improbable. How could a toddler provide actionable insights in a case that had stumped trained professionals for weeks? Yet the evidence of their connection was undeniable. Finally, a moment of clarity emerged. While reenacting the intruder's path, the girl pointed to a small patch of grass near the alley, muttered indistinct words, and glanced at Rex. The dog responded immediately, sniffing intensely, pulling gently on his harness as if indicating direction. The parents watched in awe, their confusion blending with growing realization. This was no ordinary childlike play. It was a key piece of the puzzle, a bridge between human memory and investigative action. In that instant, months of frustration began to crack under the weight of innocence and instinct. As Part 3 concludes, the stage is set for the courtroom drama to shift dramatically. The girl's silent observations and Rex's reactions foreshadow the pivotal moment when her small voice, and the dog's instincts, will become the catalyst for justice. The town, the courtroom, and the detectives remain unaware of the extraordinary revelation that is about to unfold, one that will challenge assumptions, defy expectations, and ultimately leave everyone in awe of the power of a child's perception and a K-9's loyalty. The courtroom was thick with tension, a silent weight pressing on every attendee. Lawyers debated fervently, weaving through the scattered threads of evidence, their voices sharp, deliberate, carrying the authority of training yet tinged with uncertainty. Witnesses shifted nervously in their seats, fidgeting with notes or glancing toward the jury, aware that their words could tip the balance of justice. The community, packed into the gallery, held its collective breath. Every murmur, every shuffled footstep, amplified the sense of unease. Outside, cameras captured the spectacle, transmitting live updates that had viewers across the town glued to screens, watching as months of investigation hung precariously in balance. The evidence, while significant in parts, left gaping holes. Fingerprints were partial, smudged, or inconclusive. Surveillance footage was grainy, providing fleeting glimpses rather than clarity. Witness accounts conflicted dramatically. One claimed the intruder had a limp, another swore the figure moved with unnatural speed. Even seasoned detectives sat quietly, sharing fleeting glances of frustration and doubt. The prosecution tried to build a narrative that could withstand scrutiny, yet the gaps were glaring. Every assertion was countered by uncertainty, every lead contradicted by another. In the courtroom, doubt had taken tangible form, pressing on jurors, lawyers, and spectators alike. The girl sat quietly on her mother's lap, her small fingers fidgeting, twisting the edge of her dress. She had memorized patterns, sequences, and details that no adult could fully grasp. Her mind replayed events of the robbery in precise fragments, the tilt of a head, a glimmering object, a pause in movement. Though she could not form sentences to convey these recollections, her gestures and glances conveyed more than words could. She leaned slightly forward, eyes fixed on Rex, the K-9 who had become her silent partner. The dog's muscles tensed in response, ears pricking at her slightest movements. To anyone else, it was a child's attention span wandering, but those attuned to subtle behavior recognized intent, focus, and understanding. The defense attorney rose, packing deliberately, outlining discrepancies in the evidence, pointing out the inconsistencies that plagued the case. He emphasized the impossibility of certainty, the unreliability of human recollection, and the flawed forensic trail. The jury shifted in their seats, the tension palpable. The little girl, sensing the room's shifting energy, shifted slightly herself, her gaze flicking toward the back corner where the K-9 waited. Rex's response was subtle but unmistakable, a low rumble of focus, a subtle movement forward, signaling awareness of something critical. For the few observers who noticed, it was a moment heavy with unseen significance. Witnesses took the stand one after another, each offering accounts colored by fear, misperception, or fading memory. Some remembered the intruder's clothing incorrectly, others misjudged the sequence of events. The contradictions piled like bricks, heavy and immovable. Even detectives began to voice doubts, acknowledging the trail's dead ends and the limits of forensic clarity. The courtroom's energy shifted from tense expectation to a quiet frustration, an almost tangible anxiety that the case might collapse under the weight of ambiguity. And yet, amidst this sea of doubt, a silent undercurrent pulsed, tiny movements, glances, and subtle gestures that would soon illuminate the truth. The little girl's tiny hand twitched again, a near-invisible motion toward Rex. She tilted her head slightly, as if observing the courtroom with precision beyond her years. Rex stiffened, responding immediately to signals imperceptible to human eyes. The officers accompanying him exchanged glances, recognizing instinctive communication at play. They had trained Rex to respond to scent, body language, and minimal cues, but the synchrony between the toddler and dog transcended ordinary command. In that quiet exchange, a bridge formed between memory and instinct, observation and action, a conduit through which the missing link of the case could emerge. The judge, unaware of the silent communication unfolding, called for a brief recess, hopping to allow jurors and attorneys alike a moment to regroup. Murmurs filled the room as people shifted, stretched, and whispered among themselves. The little girl, seated on her mother's lap, pointed subtly toward Rex again, her fingers trembling slightly. The dog's ears twitched, tail stiffening. For an observer unaware of canine behavior or childlike memory, it would have been insignificant. But for those trained to notice, it was a clear signal that something important lingered beneath the surface, something that could pivot the case from uncertainty toward revelation. During recess, the attorneys debated strategy in hushed tones. The defense worried about the mounting pressure of incomplete evidence, while the prosecution reviewed notes and exhibits, aware that any breakthrough could drastically alter the courtroom dynamic. Meanwhile, the little girl played quietly with a toy, glancing periodically at Rex. She repeated small gestures she had learned, motions that mirrored events of the robbery, the direction of a step, the pause by a window, the glint of an object she had glimpsed long ago. Each movement was precise, deliberate, and instinctively interpreted by Rex. Outside the courtroom, townspeople speculated on the proceedings, their curiosity and concern palpable. Conversations bubbled with theories. Some dismissed the case as unsolvable, others anticipated a surprise revelation. Reporters updated live feeds, capturing the tension and uncertainty, while social media threads buzzed with speculation. Amidst the external chaos, the courtroom itself remained a pressure cooker of nerves, doubt, and anticipation. For most present, the case teetered on the edge of collapse, with no clear path to resolution. And yet, in the quiet interplay of toddler and K9, the seed of truth lay waiting, patient, poised, and unobserved. Detectives conferred privately, reviewing all known evidence. They acknowledged the gaps, the contradictions, and the fragile chain linking suspect to crime. Months of effort had brought them here, yet certainty remained elusive. Every lead had been exhausted, every witness had been questioned repeatedly. Still, subtle anomalies lingered, marks on the floor, smudges unnoticed in earlier searches, overlooked items. The girl had observed these details, though no one realized it. And Rex, trained to notice even the faintest irregularities, had responded to her cues all along. Together, they represented a hidden key to unlocking the mystery that had confounded adults for months. As the recess ended, the gallery settled into renewed silence. The judge called the court back to order and the proceedings resumed. Witnesses took their seats, lawyers adjusted their notes, and the jury straightened in anticipation. Amidst the formalities, the little girl's small hand moved subtly again, pointing with near imperceptible precision. Rex responded, shifting forward slightly, signaling recognition. The courtroom remained unaware of this intricate dance, but those attuned to it could sense its significance. A quiet tension, a prelude to revelation. What had seemed like ordinary uncertainty was about to be transformed by extraordinary observation. The stage was set for a pivotal moment. The evidence had created doubt, the witnesses had created confusion, even the investigators were uncertain. But hidden in plain sight, the connection between the toddler's memory and the K9's instincts pulsed beneath the surface, ready to emerge. Every motion, glance, and gesture, the seemingly insignificant details of a child's observation, had accumulated, creating a reservoir of truth that no adult had yet tapped. In that tense courtroom, the calm surface belied the storm building quietly beneath, a storm that would soon shatter doubt and illuminate the truth in a way no one expected. By the time the next witness was called, the room's energy had shifted. Whispers of speculation circulated, eyes darted toward the child and Rex. No one yet understood the importance of the subtle cues exchanged between them. The gallery leaned forward slightly, sensing something, though they could not articulate it. The courtroom held its collective breath as the legal proceedings pressed forward, the threads of uncertainty stretching taut, poised for a breakthrough. And in that tension, a silent, unseen force, the collaboration of memory, instinct, and innocence, waited to reveal what no one else could see. The little girl's eyes flicked toward the back corner, then forward again, as if scanning the entire room. She pointed toward Rex, her tiny finger trembling but deliberate. The dog stiffened, ears alert, muscles coiled with anticipation. Observers who understood canine behavior recognized the subtle significance. The K9 was waiting, prepared, sensing that something was imminent. For the girl, these were not conscious decisions. They were instinctive reenactments of what she had witnessed, filtered through her perception, amplified by her bond with the dog. This delicate interplay between observation and instinct would soon become the catalyst that transformed doubt into clarity. And so, Part 4 closes with the courtroom at the brink of revelation. Evidence alone had created confusion. Testimony alone had created doubt. Yet beneath the surface, the girl's silent observations and Rex's responsive instincts had begun to converge. The storm of clarity was gathering momentum, ready to break through the layers of uncertainty and astonish everyone present. In the next chapters, the courtroom and the town would witness the extraordinary outcome of this unlikely partnership, proving that sometimes the smallest voices and keenest instincts hold the power to unravel even the most perplexing mysteries. The courtroom buzzed with muted anticipation as the next witness settled into the stand. Lawyers shuffled papers, whispering final notes to themselves. Spectators leaned forward, anxious for each word to carry weight, each gesture to matter. The tension was palpable, a tightrope stretched over months of unresolved questions and growing community frustration. Yet in the quiet corner, the little girl fidgeted, her tiny fingers entwined around her mother's hand, eyes flicking repeatedly toward Rex. The dog's head turned slightly, ears pricked, muscles taut with attention. What seemed trivial to most observers was, in fact, a prelude to something extraordinary. Earlier during recess, the girl had rehearsed quietly in her mind, replaying the events of that night like a fragmented movie. Her lips barely moved, yet her eyes reflected understanding. She had seen a glimpse of the intruder, the glint of metal in his hand, the exact spot where he had paused and glanced back toward the street. Her memory, sharp and detailed despite her age, had retained sequences that no adult had noticed. And now she realized that today, she might finally convey what she had seen, though only in her own way. The prosecutor had begun questioning a witness when a subtle shift occurred. The girl's gaze lingered on Rex, a tiny finger twitching in his direction. The dog's response was immediate, ears straightened, muscles coiled, tail stiff. It was a signal, a recognition of imminent importance. Officer Daniels noticed the interaction and leaned slightly closer, realizing the dog's reaction was not coincidental. The child's memory, conveyed silently, had triggered the K9's trained instincts. In that quiet communication lay a spark that could illuminate the truth where months of investigation had failed. No one in the courtroom expected what happened next. The girl, prompted by some internal urgency she could not yet name, lifted her tiny voice and said distinctly, "Over there." 2 words. A sentence so simple, yet so powerful that the room seemed to freeze mid-breath. Judges, lawyers, and spectators alike turned their eyes to her in disbelief. The judge paused, gavel in hand, astonishment etched across his features. Reporters snapped photos and jotted notes frantically. The courtroom, already tense, now trembled with a mix of shock and curiosity. The defendant, Harold Jennings, shifted uneasily in his seat. His attorney froze mid-motion, caught between concern and disbelief. The words were innocuous in isolation, but their timing and clarity were anything but ordinary. They aligned perfectly with a subtle gesture the girl had made moments earlier, a silent indication toward the K9. Rex responded immediately, moving forward with purpose, signaling to the officers that a direction had been identified. The room held its breath as it became apparent that this was no coincidence. This was precision guided by a combination of memory, instinct, and an extraordinary partnership. The jury exchanged uncertain glances. Some leaned forward in intrigue, others whispered quietly, unable to fully process what was unfolding. The spectators murmured among themselves, the noise rising in waves of speculation and disbelief. The prosecution, sensing an unprecedented opportunity, paused, then called Officer Daniels forward. He approached with Rex, acknowledging the courtroom's quiet awe. The dog moved with trained precision, alert to the girl's cues, muscles tense and eyes focused. Every subtle motion signaled attention, every twitch indicated awareness. The combination of child and K9 created a force that transcended the limits of standard courtroom procedure. The girl, encouraged subtly by her mother's gentle nod, pointed toward the far corner of the courtroom, repeating the words she had uttered, "Over there." The clarity of her voice, combined with the precision of her gesture, directed attention to a location within the room. The dog, reacting instantly, moved closer to the indicated area, his behavior unmistakable. Detective Reynolds, seated nearby, immediately recognized the pattern. The child's observation had created a direct lead, and the K9's response validated its authenticity. Evidence that had remained elusive for weeks was now in sight, illuminated by the simplest of phrases. Whispers rippled through the courtroom. Cameras zoomed in on the tiny girl, capturing her bright, focused eyes and the poise with which she indicated her silent truth. Lawyers, previously poised with confidence, now recalibrated, realizing that months of uncertainty might pivot entirely on this moment. The defendant's face betrayed unease, a flicker of fear crossing his features. The community, watching in awe, sensed that the case had finally found a fulcrum, an unexpected turning point emerging from innocence, instinct, and unwavering attention. The courtroom seemed to contract, every heart caught in the suspense of what was about to unfold. Rex's behavior intensified. He began moving in small, deliberate circles, tail rigid, nose twitching, scanning the indicated area. The child's gestures became more precise, tiny fingers pointing toward gaps between benches, slight inclinations of her head confirming observations that only she could see fully. Officer Daniels whispered to the lead detective, explaining how the dog was responding directly to cues from the child. "It's uncanny," he said softly. "She's guiding him. He's reading her gestures as instructions. I've never seen anything like this." The detective's eyes widened. This partnership might finally crack a case that had eluded everyone. The prosecution seized the moment, requesting that the courtroom allow Rex to investigate the indicated area. The judge, hesitant but aware of the extraordinary circumstances, nodded. A hushed murmur spread through the gallery as the dog, guided by instincts and the child's silent cues, moved precisely to a small gap near the back of the courtroom. There, partially concealed beneath the edge of a loose floorboard, lay an object, small, metallic, and gleaming faintly under the lights. The stolen evidence. Gasps erupted. The courtroom erupted into controlled chaos as the officers retrieved the item, confirming fingerprints that directly linked the object to Harold Jennings. Spectators leaned forward, disbelief and amazement etched into their faces. The little girl's 2 words, simple, almost accidental in their phrasing, had catalyzed a breakthrough that months of traditional investigation had failed to achieve. The K-9's instincts had transformed her gestures into tangible results. The improbable combination of toddler observation and canine training had shattered doubt and illuminated truth. Even seasoned detectives shook their heads in wonder. "I can't believe it," muttered one quietly. "Months of dead ends, and it comes down to 2 words from a 3-year-old. The jury, absorbing the scene, exchanged astonished glances. The courtroom atmosphere shifted from tense uncertainty to a quiet awe, punctuated by disbelief. Every individual present felt the extraordinary weight of what had just occurred. Justice had been guided, unexpectedly, by innocence and instinct. The defendant's attorney stood, speechless, attempting to regain composure. Jennings himself avoided the child's gaze, his confidence shattered. The media erupted, snapping photos, capturing the tiny heroine and her loyal K-9 partner. Outside, townspeople watched live feeds, murmuring in astonishment as the story of a toddler and her dog stunned the community. The narrative had shifted in an instant. The case that had seemed unsolvable was now collapsing under the weight of 2 simple words, and a bond that transcended language. The little girl, oblivious to the magnitude of her actions, continued to point subtly, eyes bright and focused. Rex remained at her side, vigilant and responsive. Officer Daniels quietly whispered instructions, ensuring the K-9 followed her lead. The stolen evidence, previously hidden, had been located, and investigators now had a direct path to finalize the case. In that quiet yet dramatic moment, the room collectively realized that months of doubt, contradiction, and dead ends were being replaced by clarity, validation, and the improbable heroism of a child and a dog. The judge, regaining his composure, called the court to order once more. The items were formally presented, confirmed, and linked to the defendant through fingerprints and forensic analysis. The room was silent for a long moment as the gravity of the breakthrough sank in. Everyone present, from attorneys to jurors to spectators, understood the significance. A case that had seemed impossible to solve was now firmly within reach of justice, all because of 2 simple, innocent words and an extraordinary connection between human and K-9. The courtroom was suspended in awe. Months of investigation, conflicting testimonies, and dead-end leads had culminated in a moment so improbable it seemed almost surreal. The tiny 3-year-old, sitting quietly on her mother's lap, had spoken 2 words, "over there," and in doing so, ignited a sequence of events that would unravel the case. Yet the story was far from over. The stolen items recovered under the floorboard represented only a fragment of the truth, a mere glimpse of the meticulous planning executed by Harold Jennings. The real breakthrough depended on Rex, the K-9, and his ability to follow the child's subtle cues to the locations adults had overlooked. Officer Daniels guided Rex forward, his hand firm yet gentle on the dog's harness. The dog's eyes flicked to the little girl, awaiting confirmation. Her tiny hands shifted, pointing at a small corner near the edge of the gallery. The courtroom collectively held its breath as Rex approached, tail straight, muscles taut, scanning the area with heightened focus. The audience was silent, sensing that they were witnessing something extraordinary, though none could fully comprehend the depth of the partnership between child and K-9. The dog sniffed carefully along the floor, pausing occasionally, ears twitching, body shifting with subtle precision. The little girl's gestures became slightly more deliberate, guiding Rex with movements almost imperceptible to anyone not trained to observe canine behavior. Every subtle shift of her head, every flick of a finger communicated layers of information. The intruder's path, the sequence of actions, the location of objects hidden in plain sight. To the officers, the synchronization was uncanny, bordering on miraculous. Finally, Rex stopped near a loose panel in the floor. He pawed gently, then lowered his nose, alerting Officer Daniels. The child clapped her small hands quietly, a soft smile forming, though she could not articulate the significance. The officer knelt carefully, lifting the panel to reveal a small metal box. Dust and cobwebs clung to its edges, evidence of its concealment for months. Inside lay a collection of items: cash, small electronics, and personal belongings from the store. Each piece of evidence directly connected to the crime and the defendant, forming a trail that had eluded investigators until now. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Spectators leaned forward, cameras snapped, and reporters scribbled frantically. The defense attorney's confidence wavered visibly. Harold Jennings shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tight, eyes flicking nervously toward the tiny girl and the dog that had guided them to the evidence. Even the judge, a figure accustomed to courtroom surprises, allowed a brief pause to absorb the weight of the moment. Months of frustration, doubt, and dead ends had been shattered by the combined instincts of innocence and training. Detectives moved quickly to document the recovered items. Photographs were taken, serial numbers recorded, and fingerprints meticulously analyzed. The collection provided a direct link to the defendant, filling in gaps that had frustrated investigators for weeks. What had once seemed impossible, the recovery of hidden evidence without a clear trail, was now reality. The tiny child had become the catalyst, the key witness whose memory, expressed through gestures and interpreted by a K-9, had provided clarity where human observation had failed. Rex remained at her side, tail still and attentive, eyes following every gesture. Officer Daniels whispered instructions softly, ensuring that the dog maintained focus on the child's cues. The synchronization between them was flawless, a language unspoken, instinctive, and precise. The courtroom observers, though fascinated, remained unaware of the full extent of the interaction, seeing only the results, the recovered evidence, and the astonishment it generated. The underlying mechanism, the silent dialogue between child and dog, was invisible yet undeniably powerful. The little girl's parents finally understood the significance of her actions. Their hearts swelled with pride and disbelief. They had known their daughter was observant, but they could not have imagined that her perception, combined with Rex's instincts, would solve a case that had stumped trained professionals for months. They whispered softly to one another, trying to contain their emotions while watching the courtroom's drama unfold. The child, for her part, remained calm, focused on Rex, repeating small gestures that guided the dog to the final hidden items. Among the recovered objects were items that, when cross-referenced with surveillance footage and witness statements, confirmed every critical detail of the case. The path of the intruder, the sequence of movements, and the items stolen now formed a coherent narrative, tying together evidence that had once seemed contradictory. Investigators reviewed the items carefully, noting that without the child's observations and Rex's response, this breakthrough would have been impossible. Months of speculation, confusion, and frustration had culminated in clarity. The jury, initially skeptical and tense, now leaned forward with renewed attention. What they were witnessing challenged their understanding of standard courtroom procedure. A toddler, through observation and nonverbal communication, had provided leads that professional investigators had overlooked. A K-9, trained in scent and behavior, had interpreted these signals flawlessly, uncovering evidence that was pivotal to the case. The convergence of innocence and instinct, memory and training, had created a moment that no legal textbook could anticipate. Outside the courtroom, the town held its collective breath. News spread quickly, social media erupted with astonishment, and reporters scrambled to capture the unfolding events. Conversations buzzed with awe and disbelief. A 3-year-old and a police dog had solved a case that had baffled the community for months. The extraordinary partnership between child and K-9 became the focus of national attention, a story of intuition, observation, and courage transcending age and training. Back inside, the prosecution began the careful process of linking the evidence to the defendant formally. Fingerprints, serial numbers, and forensic analysis provided concrete connections. Witnesses corroborated the reconstructed sequence of events, filling in gaps that had previously created doubt. Every piece of recovered evidence strengthened the case, building a narrative of accountability and precision. The courtroom's energy shifted from suspense to anticipation, as everyone recognized that the path to justice was finally clear. The little girl, still quietly seated on her mother's lap, continued to guide Rex subtly. Her gestures directed the dog to confirm positions of objects and highlight areas of interest. Officer Daniels followed each cue carefully, ensuring that the court understood the significance of the dog's reactions without disrupting the flow of proceedings. The precision of their collaboration was remarkable. Small motions producing results, silent communication revealing truth, and months of unanswered questions unraveling in a matter of minutes. Finally, the last hidden items were uncovered. Each object confirmed aspects of the crime, filling gaps that had frustrated investigators and lawyers alike. The courtroom, initially skeptical, now bristled with recognition of the child's unique contribution. Reporters snapped photographs, capturing the moment when a toddler and a trained K-9 had upended expectations, solved a complex case, and brought clarity where adults had failed. The story had transcended ordinary legal proceedings, becoming a tale of intuition, courage, and unlikely heroism. The judge, regaining composure, allowed a brief pause to let the significance settle. "We have before us evidence recovered through extraordinary circumstances," he said, voice calm yet carrying the weight of realization. "The court recognizes the unique contributions of all involved, and the significance of this moment will be noted in the official record." Lawyers nodded, witnesses whispered, and the audience absorbed the gravity of the events. The combination of memory, instinct, and determination had achieved what months of traditional investigation had not. As the court resumed, the prosecution began to outline the narrative supported by the newly recovered evidence. Each item told a story: the path of the intruder, the objects taken, the sequence of movements. The once fragmented testimony now coalesced into a coherent and compelling case. The defendant's attorney could only watch, aware that the tides had shifted irreversibly. The little girl and Rex, unassuming yet powerful in their collaboration, had become the linchpin of justice, their impact undeniable and extraordinary. The courtroom was electric with anticipation. Months of investigation, conflicting testimony, and the impossible partnership between a 3-year-old and a K-9 had brought the case to its final chapter. Spectators leaned forward, cameras clicked incessantly, and the jury exchanged tense glances, aware that the evidence presented in recent minutes had shifted the balance of certainty. Every observer, from the judge to the spectators in the gallery, understood that history was unfolding, not just a legal verdict, but a story that defied expectation. The prosecution presented the final summation with quiet authority. They detailed the sequence of events, linking each recovered item, witness account, and forensic clue to the defendant. The stolen goods, meticulously documented and recovered through Rex's guidance and the child's subtle cues, became the centerpiece of their narrative. Lawyers spoke deliberately, emphasizing the extraordinary collaboration that had uncovered evidence no adult could locate. The courtroom absorbed every word, the combination of factual precision and the child-dog dynamic creating a palpable sense of awe. The defense attorney, visibly shaken, struggled to maintain composure. Harold Jennings' confident posture had crumbled under the weight of revelation. The recovered evidence left little room for argument. Witnesses corroborated the narrative reconstructed from the child's observations, the K-9's response, and traditional investigative findings. The attorney's objections, though professional and precise, could not undo the clarity now evident. Each item presented reinforced a story that had once seemed hopelessly fragmented, and the courtroom sensed the inevitability of the outcome. The jury, previously tentative and skeptical, leaned forward as the prosecution methodically connected the dots. They had witnessed months of conflicting evidence and frustrating dead ends. Now, the clarity provided by the child's memory, guided by Rex's instincts, left little doubt. Each juror's eyes reflected a mixture of astonishment, understanding, and anticipation. For most, it was a moment of revelation. The realization that justice had been achieved through an extraordinary collaboration between innocence and trained instinct, memory and perception, child and K9. Meanwhile, the little girl sat quietly on her mother's lap, fingers fidgeting slightly, eyes tracking Rex with an intensity beyond her age. She did not fully understand the gravity of the courtroom proceedings, but sensed the importance of her role. Every subtle gesture she made, every glance at the dog, had contributed to the culmination of months of work. The K9 remained poised and alert, responding to her silent cues with unwavering precision. Together, they represented a force of observation and truth, one that adults struggled to fully comprehend yet could not ignore. The judge called for a short recess before the jury delivered its verdict. In that moment, the courtroom felt suspended, a collective inhale held in anticipation. Lawyers whispered quietly, preparing final arguments, while spectators murmured among themselves, speculation and emotion running high. The child's parents watched anxiously, aware that their daughter's extraordinary observations had played a pivotal role. Even seasoned officers exchanged glances, recognizing that what they had witnessed was unprecedented in their careers. Months of dead ends had been overturned by two small words and the instinctive intelligence of a K9. When the jury returned, the tension was almost unbearable. Every eye in the room focused on the foreperson as they rose to announce the decision. Silence enveloped the courtroom, broken only by the soft rustle of paper and the faint sniffle of an observer moved by the gravity of the moment. The foreperson cleared their throat, eyes sweeping across the courtroom, and began to speak. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Harold Jennings, guilty on all counts," the voice declared, firm and resolute. A wave of emotion swept through the room. Relief, awe, and astonishment blended together in a charged atmosphere. The prosecution team exhaled, their expressions a mixture of triumph and disbelief. The spectators erupted in whispered exclamations and gasps of wonder. The defense attorney sank into their chair, stunned, while the defendant's face betrayed resignation and regret. For the little girl, the announcement was incomprehensible in its complexity, yet she sensed the change in energy. Her gestures toward Rex remained subtle but purposeful, an acknowledgement of shared accomplishment. The judge, regaining composure, addressed the courtroom. "This case has demonstrated not only the importance of evidence and testimony, but also the unexpected ways in which truth can emerge," he said, voice steady yet carrying the weight of amazement. "We recognize the extraordinary contributions of all involved, particularly the unique partnership between the young witness and the K9 who guided the investigation to its resolution." Cameras flashed, capturing the rare acknowledgement of such an unconventional yet pivotal collaboration. The child's parents wept quietly, overwhelmed with pride and disbelief. Their daughter, only 3 years old, had become an unlikely hero, her observation and memory guiding Rex to recover evidence critical to securing justice. The K9, sensing the calm after the storm, relaxed slightly but remained vigilant, aware that their role, though extraordinary, was complete. For the adults in the room, the combination of innocence and instinct had achieved something beyond professional skill or logic, revealing that truth sometimes emerges in the most unexpected ways. As the courtroom proceedings continued, officers documented the final pieces of evidence, ensuring all recovered items were cataloged and secured. The prosecution summarized the narrative of the crime, highlighting the timeline, recovered objects, and critical witness observations. The jury nodded in recognition, absorbing the comprehensive account. Every detail, meticulously documented and verified, reinforced the certainty of the verdict. And behind it all, The silent guidance of a small child and her K-9 companion had been the key to unlocking a case that had seemed unsolvable. Media outlets outside the courtroom erupted. Live coverage highlighted the unusual but undeniable story of the toddler and the K-9, their partnership becoming the focus of national attention. Social media feeds buzzed with astonishment and admiration. Commentators speculated on the extraordinary bond between child and dog, noting that months of investigation had been brought to resolution through instinct, memory, and silent communication. The story transcended local interest, capturing hearts and imaginations across the country. Inside, the courtroom slowly emptied, but the memory of the moment lingered. Officers and attorneys discussed the implications, recognizing the rarity of such an event. The child, blissfully unaware of the extent of her fame, remained engaged with Rex, quietly indicating subtle cues as if to say, "We did it." The K-9 responded, muscles relaxed, eyes calm but alert. Their partnership, silent yet profoundly effective, had altered the course of the case, leaving a permanent mark on those present. Finally, the judge concluded the day's proceedings. This case will be remembered not only for the crime committed, but for the extraordinary circumstances leading to its resolution. Let it serve as a reminder that justice can emerge in unexpected ways, and that courage and observation come in many forms. A hush fell over the courtroom as the words sank in. Applause was minimal but sincere, the recognition of a truly exceptional collaboration earning quiet but profound respect from all present. As the courtroom cleared, the little girl's parents held her close. She looked up at Rex, eyes bright and trusting, unaware of the gravity of her role but proud of her tiny gestures that had made all the difference. Officers patted Rex gently, whispering praises for his extraordinary performance. And somewhere in that mix of awe, pride, and relief, the town's collective tension began to dissipate. Months of worry, investigation, and uncertainty had finally found resolution. The impossible had been achieved. The courtroom had emptied, but its echoes lingered in the hearts of everyone present. Months of investigation, frustration, and tension had been replaced by astonishment, relief, and admiration. Outside, the city buzzed with conversation, cameras flashing, reporters broadcasting live feeds to audiences across the country. The story of the 3-year-old girl and her K-9 companion had transcended a simple criminal case, capturing the imagination of a nation. From the streets to living rooms, everyone marveled at the improbable partnership that had solved a case no adult could. It was a tale of courage, instinct, and innocence reshaping justice. For the little girl, life slowly returned to its simple rhythms. She played with toys, explored the backyard, and shared quiet moments with her parents, blissfully unaware of the extraordinary role she had played in the courtroom. Yet the bond with Rex had deepened in ways subtle but profound. The dog followed her everywhere, alert and protective, responding instinctively to the smallest gestures and movements. Their partnership, forged under extraordinary circumstances, had become unbreakable. Every glance, every subtle nod, reflected a silent understanding that had saved a town months of uncertainty and brought a criminal to justice. The parents, still grappling with disbelief and pride, were careful to nurture both the child's natural curiosity and her extraordinary observational abilities. They watched her gestures, encouraging her communication, while also ensuring she remained safe and grounded. They were proud, yet cautious, aware that the world now viewed their daughter as a hero. Teachers, neighbors, and family members marveled at her insight, unaware that her contributions had required the quiet, intuitive interpretation of a K-9 to translate into action. This unique collaboration had rewritten their understanding of perception and intelligence. Rex, meanwhile, was celebrated in his own right. The police department awarded him honors for bravery, precision, and service beyond expectation. Officers spoke of his ability to read the child's cues with unparalleled accuracy, noting that no previous case had demanded such a combination of instincts and interpretation. The town held a small ceremony to recognize the dog's contribution, where young children, parents, and officers alike witnessed the remarkable connection between the K-9 and the toddler. It was more than a celebration of achievement. It was a testament to the extraordinary potential of partnership across species and age. Local media ran feature stories about the case, highlighting the extraordinary bond that had led to a breakthrough in an investigation previously deemed impossible. Headlines emphasized two words that changed everything, and the toddler who outsmarted a criminal, capturing the public's imagination. Interviews with the parents, officers, and prosecutors conveyed awe and humility. Social media buzzed with admiration as people shared stories of courage and intelligence that transcended expectations. Across the country, viewers were reminded that insight and bravery could come from the most unlikely sources. The recovered evidence, formally cataloged, provided the foundation for the final sentencing. Harold Jennings faced the consequences of his actions, a conviction solidified by irrefutable evidence and a narrative reconstructed with precision. The community felt a sense of closure, reassured that justice had been achieved. The once elusive thief could no longer evade accountability, and the town's collective anxiety dissipated. Residents praised the extraordinary methods that had brought resolution, recognizing the value of observation, instinct, and cooperation that extended beyond traditional boundaries. In schools, children learned about the case in simplified stories, emphasizing observation, attention to detail, and courage. Teachers used the story to encourage students to notice small details, value listening, and appreciate teamwork, even in unlikely forms. Parents recounted the events to younger children at bedtime, framing the narrative as a tale of intuition and bravery, where even the smallest voice could affect monumental change. The story's resonance extended far beyond the courtroom, influencing education, community awareness, and conversations about the value of observation and instinct. The little girl, now recognized as a local hero, carried herself with quiet confidence, never fully aware of the magnitude of her impact. Her parents encouraged her to explore, learn, and grow without pressure, ensuring her natural abilities were nurtured without expectation. Rex remained her constant companion, alert and loyal, embodying the silent collaboration that had changed the course of justice. The two had formed an extraordinary bond, a relationship built on trust, perception, and instinct, representing a living example of how partnership can transcend age, experience, and species. Months later, the police department documented the case as a reference for unique investigative methods. Officers noted the role of nonverbal cues, K-9 intuition, and unconventional communication in resolving complex cases. Experts from other departments visited to study the methods employed, intrigued by the implications for future investigations. The collaboration between child and dog became a landmark example of how perception, memory, and instinct could combine to achieve outcomes previously thought impossible. It redefined the understanding of teamwork, intelligence, and problem-solving within law enforcement. The community celebrated not only the resolution of the case, but also the extraordinary demonstration of courage, intelligence, and instinct. Town leaders hosted a small gathering to honor the heroes, the toddler, her parents, and Rex. Speeches were given, photographs taken, and gratitude expressed in every corner of the room. The story became part of local lore, retold with reverence and admiration. Residents reflected on the improbable circumstances, recognizing that justice had been achieved not solely through formal investigation, but through the quiet brilliance of a child's perception amplified by a loyal K-9 companion. Years later, the story continued to inspire. Journalists revisited it for human interest pieces, educators included it in lessons on observation and critical thinking, and officers cited it in training programs. The narrative emphasized the extraordinary potential hidden in unexpected places, the mind of a child, the instincts of a dog, and the silent collaboration that bridged the two. It became a symbol of hope, ingenuity, and perseverance, reminding all who heard it that even the smallest voice, guided with care and insight, could affect monumental change. For the little girl, now a little older, the memories remained a quiet, vivid thread in her life. She played, learned, and explored, occasionally glancing at Rex with understanding that transcended words. The world recognized them as heroes, yet their greatest achievement lay not in fame or accolades, but in the trust, perception, and silent communication that had achieved what adults alone could not. It was a legacy of intuition, courage, and partnership, an enduring testament to the extraordinary potential found in the most unlikely sources. And so, the town moved forward, safe and reassured, with a story that would live in memory for generations. A 3-year-old's 2 words had changed the course of events. A K-9's instincts had bridged gaps impossible for humans alone, and justice had been served in a way that was at once improbable and undeniable. The child and her dog returned home, a quiet pair of heroes whose courage, perception, and unwavering bond had left a permanent mark on their community, proving that sometimes the smallest and quietest voices carry the greatest power. The town would never forget them,